Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Supercars of London, and for the first time in God knows how long, I can actually say I am in London. Look, there's an ambulance driving down Park Lane. I'm in central London, inside the congestion zone, and for the first time ever, this is the BMW M2 that I'm seeing in the UK in the flesh. I've seen one in France, I've seen one in California, and I've got the keys to this car thanks to BMW Park Lane, where I collected my BMW M2 competition back in 2020, 3 years ago, and now BMW have come out with this, a car that many people argue looks like a Lego car, but every review says it is a phenomenal drive. So I have 60 minutes to see whether I can be convinced, away from the looks of it, that this is the next car for the Supercars of London YouTube channel. Now, this section of the road is one way, and this is going to hinder my first 60 minutes driving the M2 competition. Now, inside, I'm pretty sure it has this new credit card style key, but I'm old school, so I have the keys right here. So let's take a quick look inside, and as you would expect, it's very familiar to the new M3 and M4 interiors. You've got this huge screen interface. Oh, that graphic's quite cool actually there as it's spinning around. And I'm going to be, hopping in. Here we go. Some nice little carbon fibre bits here. Carbon fibre here. I've got my bag here with all of the camera equipment. This is quite cool. That M coloured stitching here is rather special. And this guy is delaying my driving. This car's only done 178 miles. Wow, this car is brand new. I think I'm going to be one of the first people in the UK to drive a right-hand drive M2, so I'm going to be trying to get this video out as fast as possible, but I really like that detail. Now, when I found out that I was going to be driving this car this morning, approximately an hour and a half ago, I had to do a little bit of research because there wasn't that much that I'd done in terms of research to understand this car, other than the fact that I was a little bit disappointed with the BMW designers in the way that they had made the new M2. So we will try and rattle through some of the stats that you may know, but also some of the little quirky facts and figures that I've then done a little bit of comparison research on and realised there's some pretty surprising stuff that comes out of this car. So of course it's a smaller version than the M3, M4. It's a detuned engine. It's got 454 brake horsepower as opposed to just over 500 with the M3 and the M4. But it's a little bit bigger than the previous generation M2 competition, which you would expect on the new cars. But even though the M2 is supposedly the small M car, the one where you can really throw it around and wrestle with it and it feels a little bit like a go-kart, and don't get me wrong, this driving position and the fact that you have a slightly longer nose there definitely gives you confidence that you probably could push on, but obviously, as you can see, this is not the time or the place to be doing that. The one thing that I was amazed by, considering it's the M2, it's the baby M car, is the weight of it. It was the one standout stat that I could not get over. It's around 1,700 kilos. Exactly 1,700 if you opt for the £500 optional extra manual gearbox. It's 25 kilograms heavier if you have the 8-speed auto transmission that is in this car. 1,700 kilos. It's the same weight as an F-Type V8 that has a massive 5-litre supercharged V8. So it's a huge GT car that weighs 1,700 kilos. Pretty sure my Murcielago was around 1,700 kilos. My God, did that feel like a heavy car. So it's the one thing that stood out because the M2 is such a popular track car. It's a car that you see floating around all over the Nürburgring. So for those guys that are going to be ploughing into corners and relying on the brakes, you're going to have to hope that BMW have some pretty intense braking systems to be able to withstand fundamentally what I feel like is quite a heavy car that kind of slots in and competes with the hot hatch world. Now, the one thing that I found really interesting as I was reading through a number of different reviews, because this car has only recently been launched, and they launched it out in Arizona, which is an incredibly cool place, and the roads are super smooth. I drove 720S Spider and 600 LT Spider out there on the International Media Drive for the McLaren convertibles as they launched together. So for BMW to take this car out there, it's similar to the way that Lamborghini launched the Urus Performante solely on track, because they were a little bit nervous about the day-to-day living of the suspension. Now, the setup on this car is an evolution to that of the BMW M3 Touring. So you'd like to think it's a little bit softer, but when you start flicking it into Sport and Sport Plus, it really starts to stiffen up. And Evo were the ones that said, we're unsure whether the M2 is going to be soft enough for the UK roads. And let me tell you, with the 5 minutes experience that I've had of sitting in pretty much standstill traffic the entire time, the suspension system is fantastic. But in all seriousness, sometimes you get in a car and you start bouncing around the tarmac, even in central London, and you go, this is a little bit too stiff for the road. Let me tell you, the GT4, the GT4 RS, the 992 GT3, they are all incredibly stiff cars. The GT3 RS is even stiffer. This is so far actually quite tolerable. And when I bought my M2 competition, the only BMW experience that I had had up until that point was the M3, and I really liked the ride quality of that car, and I almost wished that my M2 competition was going to be as relaxing and comfortable to drive, and it didn't really happen, and I was a little bit underwhelmed by the daily ability of my M2 competition. But like with almost every modern car that exists now, the breadth of ability that the manufacturers have been able to create, this is such a relaxing car to cruise around in. Even here, you've got some real uneven surfaces, you've got some potholes popping up, you've got lorries coming down here all day and almost all night long, and it really isn't as bad as, I mean, I think my Golf GTI is a little bit stiffer than this. So I think as the first consumer test goes, this is actually a big tick, that it's a really usable car to cruise around central London is. I'll probably give it some. Yeah, it's quick. It's quick. I think where I've just jumped into this car out of my Golf GTI, instantly you can feel the premiumness, you can feel the value and the level of luxury, because on paper, if you're looking at a BMW M2 for £66,000 plus options, you're looking at around £80,000. That is a hell of a lot of money to be putting into a car that once was the baby M car. It's not so baby anymore. It is a very, very grown up car. And that goes back to when I drove the BMW M2 40i. I was driving that car around going, I don't particularly like the way that it looks, but I can actually see past that because of the way that it drives. It was such a fun daily driver. It was so good at what it was supposed to be doing, and it had a hell of a lot of performance. I'm still not convinced by the looks of this car. I think I'd prefer the M2 40i over this. And I think, just based on the fact that the M2 40i is what, £50,000 on the used market, and then if you're going to look at the old shape BMW M2 competition, which is arguably a slightly more characterful, more soulful M car product, it is hard to go, I'm going to spend loads more money and buy one of these, especially if you're not convinced by the way that it looks, which recently I actually put a tweet out and asked whether there was anyone out there that actually liked the way that this looked. And I think the majority of the responses were that no one really does. So there you kind of go, well, there's a lot of people that are going to want this car because it's the new car, but other than that, I almost feel like people will be wanting or lusting after the old BMW M2 competition because this is a more grown up, a softer, a faster, but in some instances you could argue slightly more numb experience. I think the market for the used BMWs, the M240i and the M2 competition, are probably going to get quite a lot more interest because this car obviously is a huge talking point within the automotive world. Everyone's interested to find out what it's actually like because it looks the way that it looks, and there will be a lot of people that won't be able to see past the looks and actually go, I'm going to save myself a bit of money, I'm going to get more value for money and actually go after the old generation M2 competition. There was another article that actually said the biggest competitor that this model has is the previous generation. So I definitely feel like I am pining for another more elaborate experience to convince me otherwise. But at the moment, this road's a little bit stiffer. I'm not even going to try and put it into Sport Plus because it is a little bit stiff, but not to the point where you're like, oh my God, wouldn't be able to daily this car. So again, like a little bit like the M240i, BMW have pulled it one way so that it's a pretty capable daily driver, very usable, but then pulled it even further the other way as a performance car. And it was actually the one reason why I sold my BMW M2 competition, because the GTR was able to be a better sports / supercar and a better daily. So the breadth of ability of the Nissan GTR, the 2017 one that I had, was actually a much better package than the M2 competition that I owned at the same time. So that's why I chose the GTR over the M2. So actually now I wonder if I had this in the spec that I would want, which maybe be like a dark grey or a black and then satin PPF it, potentially you'd get more enjoyment out of being in a cabin like this, which is absolutely perfect, and then having a bit more performance, but then a more usable daily driver. So many things to weigh up, but thank you to BMW Park Lane for allowing me to have this very quick drive, and I am gonna have a lot of fun trying to figure out how to actually title this video, how to actually figure out, because it's not in any way, shape or form a complete review, and actually it is like a 1% slice of a pizza before actually tasting the entire thing. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun to just drive around and be back in central London. I'm going to pop back to the guys, chat to them and see what we can come up with, see what cars they have available. But yes, this video has come off the back of me getting back in touch with BMW Park Lane and seeing whether there is any opportunities for me to chop in my Golf GTI in some form or another and scratch that BMW itch. I'll leave the video there. Hopefully you've enjoyed this very small insight into the world of the brand new M2. I will see you soon, guys. Take care. Goodbye.